Everybody, the government has put improving public housing and increasing the availability of public housing front and centre of our housing program over the last 6 years. We've added 13,000 additional public homes to the overall availability of public houses in New Zealand since we've been in government. That's about 1 in 7 of the public houses now available have been built in the time that we have been in government. We're really proud of that track record. The development that we're here to look at today and to acknowledge the opening of is a really significant part of that public housing picture, because it provides that full wraparound support to some of our most vulnerable public housing tenants. So over the next little while we'll see this place tenanted, and it's an incredible opportunity for the people who will be moving from often quite challenged circumstances into an environment which is going to be much more positive and much more supportive. Look, I'm not going to rest until we have built enough houses to accommodate all of the people who are in need. We've seen an increase in the number of people who are in need in recent decades. The work that we've done as a government has actually made that more visible. The last government purged people from the public housing waiting lists, and now we're seeing the consequences of that. So people who had moderate needs during the tenure of the last government got dropped off the waiting list. They're coming back on the waiting list now because their housing needs have become more urgent. In fact, they've always had a housing need. We've been making sure that the housing register accurately reflects the level of need that there is. Yeah. A lot of work has gone into identifying what the right model for this kind of public housing is. What's the right mix of tenancies, what's the right mix of the size and composition of the apartments that are available here, what sorts of social sector support needs to be wrapped around. You'll see just over there, for example, there are health facilities available. What other kind of social support is required for people living in these environments. So a lot of work has gone into considering how best to do that. And so this is, if you like, best practice design. It's drawn on New Zealand and international evidence about how best to do this. But I'll invite the Minister to comment too.
Thank you. I'm just going to also address the pace at which we're building it. When we came into government in 2017, then Housing New Zealand had largely become a sales unit to sell off our state housing. That it's taken time to build the capacity to be able to build at the scale that we need to do. And I think when you consider that the previous government left office with 1,500 fewer public houses than they started with over 9 years, but last month alone we delivered over 1,000 public houses. I think you can see the massive turnaround in capacity that has happened in 6 short years. In terms of the model that we're operating here, we've worked really closely with Helen Robertson at the Auckland City Mission. Home ground is 500 metres from where we are here. We see this as a precinct. In fact, there's been staff that worked, who came from Brisbane to work on developing the model for home ground, who came across and worked for Kāinga in terms of looking at what best practice is, and we have been driven by that evidence. There's been reference teams that have actually included some of our homeless who have told us what they need in terms of coming off the street and getting into housing. So I think this represents a model of how we are committed to doing things differently.
And has that also been assisted with Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, who presented today with, I guess, a Kāinga model?
Oh, look, absolutely. Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei have been an absolute partner from the beginning in terms of the build. We've had a social procurement model happening here in terms of making sure that we have locals who have benefited from the build. One of the things that this gives us, as well as shelter and hope for our residents, but it also is providing really good job and training opportunities for local people, and we're seeing that very strongly.
And how will they play a part in helping to improve, I guess, the state of the incidents that have occurred here?
Well, Ngāti Whātua's relationship and partnership with the site doesn't finish with the building being completed. It will be enduring and it will be ongoing. Thank you. I'll just let the Prime Minister back there.
Will there be more of these projects? You had a massive team building this. Why not move move on to another one immediately. So you keep
in
that
Wellington this week.
We are. So we've got a pipeline of projects underway. Again, I'll invite the Minister to provide some further details of that. But we clearly need to keep the momentum going, and that involves having a government that's committed to keeping that momentum going. And we know that the National Party's track record is that they stop momentum on building new public houses and instead focus on selling off the ones that we already have.
So only this week we marked an important milestone in Wellington at an 80-unit complex in Rolleston Street, which again is in partnership with the Wellington City Mission, who'll be providing wraparound support for 20 of those units in terms of supported living. I've been to a number of ways in which we're doing our housing differently. When you're building at the scale we are and have a real commitment to public housing like we are, we don't think there is a one-size-fits-all, and we're looking at what do we need to do for our older New Zealanders, what's the right model of housing for them. And I'll be visiting Highbury Triangle later this afternoon here in Auckland, which is essentially public housing, the public equivalent of some of the apartments we see in retirement villages, and how we can better suit our older New Zealanders who are in public housing and what good facilities look like for them. But to continue doing this, there has to be a government that has a proven track record and an upfront commitment that public housing is a priority for them. We've had to turn that around after 9 years under a national government when they sold off our public housing and failed to add to the stock.
As far as the structure of this development, how many of the apartments are going to be for how many apartments are going to be?
So this is around 276 units across the whole complex. 200 of those are public housing, 76 of them are market rentals. At the moment, the market rentals are all in one part of the building. There's various models around the world, but this is new in New Zealand to do this. I was persuaded as Minister and then had to persuade my colleagues that this was the best case, because in some ways it goes against the grain a bit, that we're building this as public housing, but there's a very good reason of why we're doing this, and I was persuaded by those that are expert in working with our homeless and working at how we get the best outcomes, that we need to be building communities. We need to be bringing people, different people together to live together, and it was Helen from the Auckland City Mission that persuaded me that this was and Sir Chris Farrelly actually, that this was the best model for how we could get the best outcomes for our tenants here.
Minister, would you say that at parties finance that you're not giving up enough money from your housing portfolios to spend?
I say that the ACT Party are just making assertions.
No, absolutely not. Those reports are just totally and utterly false. As we indicated at the beginning of the year, we have been focused on reprioritisation. We've been focused on finding any efficiencies that we can in the budget. And you saw that in the budget earlier this year, where we reprioritised around $4 billion worth of spending. And we said that that will be an ongoing process. But the idea that we're trying to fill a massive hole like that is just farcical.
Are you being upfront?
Oh, absolutely. The New Zealand government's books are some of the most transparent in the world. The government's financial accounts are released every month. So every political party in Parliament has no excuses really for not knowing the state of the government's finances. They get released every month.
Those reports came from Winston Peters. Do you think you could work with him again then?
Winston Peters has ruled out working with us, and I'm quite comfortable about that.
Prime Minister, the most recent Crown Account information showed tax revenue is down, the deficit is up. Are you concerned about that?
There's no question that the government's finances are in a more challenging position now than they have been before. We were really transparent about that in the budget, and the decisions that we made in the budget reflected that. As we head into the election, the Treasury will do an update not just of the government's accounts, but actually of their forecasts of what's likely to happen in the future. They do that independently of the government, and all political parties, I'm sure, are awaiting the outcome of that. But you don't need to await the outcome of that to see the government's monthly accounts show that government revenue has deteriorated. That's publicly available information. And as all responsible governments do, we're working hard to make sure we balance the books.
So if the government revenue is deteriorating, then what is the gap? If it's not 20 billion, what is gap likely to be over the next couple of months?
Well, the projections for what that means in the longer term, of course, are part of the pre-election fiscal update. Treasury do a projection of what they think it's going to happen, what will happen over the forecast period, and then, of course, what they think that means for longer term projections. But you can see from the monthly accounts that there's been a deterioration.
But you must have done some work, yourselves, for different government departments, have done work on what they expect in terms of what they will need to cut back on because there's less revenue coming in.
Well, government departments will be in a more constrained fiscal environment in the near future. I think that's different from talking about significant cuts. It means that there won't be as much money available for funding increases in the future. Of course, that's a process that government departments are used to going through. This is part of the regular government budgeting cycle. Absolutely. I've said right from the beginning that the cost of living is one of the most important issues facing New Zealanders, and that's been front and centre of the work that the New Zealand government, that my government, has been doing on the economy. We've been focused on lifting income so that people can get ahead. We've been focused on getting inflation back down because we know that's going to help to bring interest rates back down. Those are things that have a real and pressing impact on New Zealand families.
Why do you think these British nationals paid parental?
Because ultimately we were concerned that it undermined the intention of the extension of paid parental leave to 6 months. So the intention of the extension was to ensure that babies, newborn babies, get 6 months at home with their parents by allowing the reduction in that overall 6-month period, which is what the National Party bill did. That's not necessarily going to be in the best interests of the child. There's a good science for why we chose 6 months, because actually if you look at the science around childhood attachment, for example, having a parent at home for 6 months is actually incredibly important to a baby's development. Well, breastfeeding's one of the factors that goes into the science around attachment, but it's not the only one. Having that consistent at-home presence for the first 6 months of a baby's life is actually really important to their emotional as well as their physical development. Well, no, because we don't pick which parent takes the 6 months of paid parental leave. So dads can take 6 months of paid parental leave now. And as somebody who took parental leave when my children were born, I'd encourage them to do that.
Will the decision on
We'll set out our election policies, our election manifesto in due course. We have not yet done that. Well, the Labour Party election manifesto generally tends to cover on quite a broad range of issues, and I'm sure that there'll be clarity around what our future intentions are on paid parental leave. Our manifesto generally tends to cover off just about every question you could answer, or you could ask, but we haven't released it yet.
Will a decision on He Waka Ikinoa be made this side of the election?
There are 3 parts to the He Waka Ikinoa equation. So one is measurement, so making sure that every farm in the country has a clear idea in an accurate, reliable and comparable way of what their emissions profile is. So yes, I believe that we will have significant progress on that before the election, to the point where people will know exactly what's happening. The second is around sequestration, so that's the opportunity for farms to reduce their emissions through planting, through better use, through reducing use of through a whole lot of other things that basically will mean that they can sequester their emissions, and so they'll have clarity on that. The final issue, of course, is the issue around pricing, and will we have a price in place in the next year? No, but we've never intended to have a price in place in the next year. There was always an intention to have measurement up and running and in place first, and then have pricing follow after that.
Prime Minister, if the government is focusing on the issues that affect Kiwis, why has there been such polls?
I think we have to acknowledge that it's been a really tough year for New Zealanders, and it's come off the back of 2 incredibly tough years with COVID-19 as well. 3 incredibly tough years with COVID-19, in fact. So we've been through a bit of a storm in recent times, quite both literally and figuratively, and I think that's reflected in New Zealand's overall mood and overall sentiment towards politics and towards politicians. What you'll see from the polling is that polls are very volatile at the moment. There is no clear winner coming out of any of the opinion polls at the moment, and that means that it's game on.
The minor parties look set to wield quite a bit of power selection. Would you need to be more flexible?
And we'll set out what our bottom lines are when we release our manifesto. So those will be the issues that we're not willing to negotiate on, that are absolute musts for us. And then, of course, the nature of MMP government, which New Zealanders have repeatedly voted in favour of, is that compromise is inherent in having a proportional representation system of government. No, we will differentiate around our bottom line. So we'll say what are the things that we're not willing to negotiate on. I like to think I'm a likeable guy. But look, ultimately voters are going to make their own judgments on that as we head into the election. I think the Labour Party is going to be putting forward a very positive and a very compelling vision for New Zealanders in the forthcoming election campaign. Of course, up until now, we've been focused on governing the country, which is what incumbent governments do. We've got 3 more parliamentary sitting weeks to go, and then the balloon will go up and the campaign will be on. And then we'll be absolutely focused on campaigning. But we've still got some governing to do between now and then.
So will you release your manifesto? When are you going to start announcing policy?
You'll see more from us over the next few weeks, but really the bulk of our policies, as every incumbent government has done previously, will be released during the campaign period rather than in the lead up to the campaign period. I think what New Zealanders want to see from us in the next 4 weeks, basically, is that we continue to lead the country responsibly as the government, which is our job, and that is what we are doing. And then as we head into the election campaign, they're going to want to see what our vision for the future is and what we're offering in terms of the commitments we're putting before them for the next election, and they'll see that too.
So this is a big project that began and ended within the Labour government sort of terms. I mean, why has this project come off? What lessons are you going to take forward from this as opposed to other large projects?
So I think we're seeing right across our public house build that we're seeing projects being delivered in a really timely manner and being successful. I think one of the critical things with this, which is probably the most complex public housing build that we've done in New Zealand to date, is the partnerships that we established really early on. So obviously with Tangata Whenua, with Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, but also with the other housing providers in the area, with Auckland City Mission, and really worked around what was best practice. We also saw a different procurement model. There was a social procurement model in terms of making sure that we had locals who were really benefiting from the economic benefit of a build like this. So I think there's a lot that we can take from this, but I also think that Kāinga Ora in the last 6 years has turned itself around from being a sales unit that Housing New Zealand was under the previous government to being an organisation with a great deal of expertise of delivering projects.
So the old Grays Lab and Gordon Wilson Flats, I think, were built at similar sort of times, and obviously one was heritage listed and the other was not. I mean, is it, I think people in Wellington would have welcomed something like this in that sort of area. I mean, is it time to look at some of these heritage? Well,
of course, in Wellington, we're building Arlington. So a very large development that is happening at Wellington. Also opened Rolleston Street, the 80-unit complex that includes 20 supported living. But Arlington will be another of our largest projects in New Zealand that will also have on-site support, much like this. So I don't think we have to draw simple dichotomies like that. What we can see with the scale of our build program, that actually we are getting on. If we were going to have to go through the struggles of dealing with will we or won't we with a heritage building, I think we'd still be waiting for work to begin. Instead we're cracking onto it, and Arlington is underway.
Will future public housing developments prioritise the support services? Is that something we can expect to see?
It will be a mix. Not all of our tenants need supported living environments like this, and this is the critical part of what we're doing. It's about building family homes in more suburban locations. It's about building townhouses. It's about building apartments. It's about building supported living. It's about building a whole range of different houses for the different needs of our tenants. It's not one size fits all.
All right. Thanks very much, everybody. Well, have a good day.
Thank you.
Now, which way are we heading? This way?